There's a particular kind of grief that never fully heals, not the grief of losing someone to death. That grief, however devastating, comes with finality, with a clear before and after. I'm talking about the grief of losing someone who's still alive, someone who chose to leave, someone who looked at you, her child, and decided someone else mattered more. My name is Diane Calloway. I'm 58 years old, and 40 years ago, when I was 18 and my younger sister Patrice was 15, our mother Ruth chose her new husband over both of us and walked out of our lives with her weekend bag and her new diamond ring, leaving us in an apartment with 3 days' worth of food, $200 in an envelope, and a note that said, "You girls are old enough to manage. Be good to each other." Be good to each other. She didn't come back. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not for my sister's hospitalization when she was 16, not for my college graduation, not for either of our weddings. 40 years of silence, punctuated by occasional Christmas cards that stopped coming in the early 90s when I stopped responding to them. I built a life without her. A good life, actually. A real estate career that made me financially comfortable, a husband named Carl who loves me completely, 2 adult children who would never in a million years understand what it feels like to be abandoned by their mother because I'd sooner die than do to them what Ruth did to me. I thought I was done with her, truly done. The kind of done that doesn't hurt anymore. That's just settled into the background like an old scar, present, permanent, but not actively painful. And then, 4 months ago, my cousin Linda called me from Nashville. "Diane, I know this is complicated, but I think you should know. Your mother has stage 3 ovarian cancer. She's in treatment, but it's not going well, and she's asking for you." 40 years of nothing, and now she was asking for me. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest of this story, because I know what some people will think. They'll think this is a revenge story, a bitter daughter who withheld care from a dying mother to satisfy some decades-old grudge. They'll think I'm the villain. I'm not. And by the time I'm done telling you what those 40 years actually looked like, what she did, what the people around her did, what I discovered when I finally picked up that call and started asking questions, I think you'll understand why the choice I made was the only one I could live with. But let me start at the beginning. The real beginning. My father, James Calloway, died of a heart attack when I was 12. He was 41 years old, working double shifts at a textile plant in Greensboro, North Carolina, trying to save enough money for us to move somewhere safer. He died on a Thursday morning in March 1978, and our family died with him in most of the ways that mattered. My mother Ruth was 34, widowed, with 2 daughters, me at 12 and Patrice at 9, and very little in the way of practical skills. My father had handled the bills, the car, the household decisions. My mother had worked part-time as a bank teller but had never managed money, never paid rent independently, never really been on her own. She fell apart. Not the kind of falling apart that eventually rebuilds, the kind that keeps collapsing. She missed work. We fell behind on rent. The practical business of keeping our small family running fell to me, the 12-year-old who'd watched her father be strong and capable and had absorbed enough to fake competence even through grief. I cooked. I managed what little money came in. I made sure Patrice went to school and had lunch in her bag. I mothered my actual mother through her worst periods, talked her into getting up, reminded her to eat. I was 12 years old and I was keeping our family alive through sheer determination. When I was 14, Ruth met Gerald. Gerald Whitfield was 47, twice divorced, drove a new Cadillac and wore cologne that preceded him into every room. He had money. Not a lot, but enough. And he was attentive and charming, and he made my mother laugh for the first time in 2 years. I didn't trust him immediately. Couldn't have explained why. Just a gut-level discomfort, the kind that children get when something's wrong and adults have stopped listening. He moved in within 4 months of meeting her. The apartment shifted. His things took up space. His preferences dictated dinner. His moods set the temperature of the household. And he didn't like us. Specifically, he didn't like me. "You've spoiled those girls," he told my mother loud enough that Patrice and I could hear from our shared bedroom. "They don't respect you. They don't respect the house. They need discipline." His version of discipline was erratic and cruel. Not physical, he was too smart for that, but psychological. Punishments that didn't fit any offense. Rules that changed without notice. Criticism that was constant and specific and designed to chip away at confidence. He'd look at me and say, "You think you're so smart, don't you? Just like your father. And look how that worked out." He'd tell Patrice she was simple and wouldn't amount to anything. When Patrice cried, he'd tell her she was weak and pathetic. When I was 16, I told my mother that Gerald had said he wished we'd both been boys because girls are useless except as currency. She told me I was being dramatic and that Gerald was under a lot of stress. I understood then that she'd made her choice. She just hadn't finished making it yet. The summer I turned 18, I'd been accepted to UNC Greensboro on partial scholarship. I was working 2 jobs to save money for my first year. I had a plan, a future, a path out. 3 weeks before I was supposed to start college, Gerald told my mother it was him or us, that he was tired of supporting other men's children, that we were ungrateful and difficult, that he wanted a fresh start. She chose him. He gave her an ultimatum on a Sunday evening. By Wednesday, she'd packed a bag. The envelope with $200 was on the kitchen counter. Patrice was sitting on the floor of our bedroom, not crying, just staring at the wall with the particular emptiness of someone who's been hit too many times to react anymore. "You girls will be fine," my mother said in the doorway. She looked sorry, or maybe she just looked like someone who's made a terrible decision and needs it to not be that terrible so she can live with herself. "We won't be fine," I said. "Patrice is 15. You can't leave a 15-year-old. "You're here. You've always handled things." She said it like it was a compliment. Like the 12 years of work I'd done managing her household were just my natural personality, not labor extracted from a grieving child. "I'm leaving for college in 3 weeks. What happens to her when I'm gone?" "Gerald's sister said she could stay there if needed. It'll be fine." She left. Gerald's sister never offered anything. I deferred college for a year, got a full-time job, kept our apartment, raised my 15-year-old sister for 12 months until I could get her stable enough that I could leave for school without abandoning her. I never forgave my mother for making me make that choice. And for 40 years, I never had to. Until Linda called. 40 years sounds like a long time to carry something. And it is. But it's also surprising how much of those 40 years I spent barely thinking about Ruth at all. That's the thing people don't understand about childhood abandonment. They imagine it as a constant wound, a daily aching, an obsession with the person who left. Sometimes it is. For me, it was more like learning to live in a house with a room you never open. It's there. You know it's there. Occasionally you notice the door, but mostly you just live your life in the other rooms. Let me tell you what actually filled those 40 years, because they weren't empty. They were full. After deferring my first year to care for Patrice, I went to UNC Greensboro at 19, worked part-time, studied harder than anyone I knew, graduated with a business degree at 23, got my real estate license, started selling houses in Raleigh, where no one knew me as Ruth Whitfield's abandoned daughter, where I was just Diane Calloway, sharp and driven and determined to never be financially dependent on anyone. I met Carl at 26, Carl Brennan, a civil engineer with a dry sense of humor, steady hands, and the particular quality of paying attention to things other people miss. We dated for 2 years, which I needed to trust him, to believe his consistency wasn't performance. Married at 28, which my mother would have known about if she'd been in contact. She wasn't. The last card I'd received from her was a Christmas card when I was 25 with no return address and a brief note. "Hope you're doing well. We think about you. Mom." We, her and Gerald, the couple who'd replaced us. I didn't respond. I was done being an afterthought. Carl and I had 2 children, Marcus in 1994, Elena in 1997. Raising them was the great project of my life. I was determined to be the mother Ruth hadn't been. Present, consistent, capable of putting them first even when it was inconvenient, even when I was tired, even when Gerald Whitfield's voice occasionally surfaced in my head saying, "Girls are useless except as currency," and I'd think about what it meant to prove that wrong by raising a daughter who knew her worth. Elena is now 27, a pediatric physician's assistant in Charlotte. She has no idea what her grandmother put me through, knows only that my mother wasn't in the picture. She asked once when she was about 12, and I gave her the honest version. She chose to leave when I was 18, and we didn't reconcile. People make choices, and sometimes those choices can't be unmade. Are you sad about it? I was. Then I made a different family. She accepted that with the particular wisdom of a child who trusts her parents. Marcus is 30, works in tech, lives in Austin, calls me every Sunday without being asked. This is not an accident. I built a relationship with him where he wants to call, where our conversations matter, where he's not performing duty but expressing genuine connection. I built that deliberately, consciously, specifically because I knew what it felt like when a parent didn't. My sister Patrice and I remained close through everything. She's 55 now, lives in Greensboro, teaches middle school English, has a daughter named Becca who's the light of her life. Patrice had a harder road than me. She struggled more with what Ruth did, spent more years hoping for reconciliation that never came, entered therapy in her 30s, and did the hard work of understanding that her mother's choices weren't her failure. You were always better at detaching, Patrice told me once. I kept hoping she'd come back, explain herself, apologize. You just moved on. It wasn't moving on, I told her. It was survival. I couldn't afford to keep waiting for her to show up. And now she is showing up. That was the conversation after Linda's call. Patrice already knew. Linda had called her first, knowing she was softer, thinking she'd convince me to respond. She has cancer, Patrice said. She wasn't crying, but her voice had that specific quality it gets when she's working very hard not to. It's serious. I know, Linda told me. Are you going to do anything? I'm thinking. What is there to think about? She's our mother. She stopped being our mother when she chose Gerald over us. You know that. People make mistakes. People regret things. Has she called? Has she written? Has she sent word through anyone that she regrets anything specifically? Silence. That's what I thought. Here's what my cousin Linda had told me about the past 40 years. Information I hadn't known because I'd specifically chosen not to know. Ruth and Gerald had married 3 months after leaving us. Gerald had 2 children from his second marriage, adult children, both his. They'd had no children together. They'd moved around, Charlotte, then Atlanta, then Nashville where Linda was. Gerald had died in 2018, 6 years ago now, heart attack. Ruth had been alone since. She had one friend, a woman named Carla from her church. She had Gerald's children who tolerated her but didn't love her. She had my cousin Linda, who was kind enough to check on her occasionally. She did not have Patrice. She did not have me. In 2018, when Gerald died, Linda told me that Ruth had mentioned wanting to contact us, that Gerald being gone had removed an obstacle, that she thought about reaching out. She hadn't. 6 more years passed. She got cancer, and now she was asking for us. Not because she'd done the work, not because she'd written letters of apology or sent messages through family or demonstrated any understanding of what she'd done. Not because she'd changed, because she was scared, because she was sick, because she needed something and we were the something she'd decided to need. I'd spent 40 years building a life without her, building it deliberately, carefully, in direct response to her absence. And now, she needed that life to pause, to turn toward her, to give her something she hadn't earned. I thought about it for 3 weeks. Then I made my decision. And it was, I think, the most honest decision I've ever made. I need to explain something about the 3 weeks I spent thinking, because this wasn't a passive process of waiting for an answer to appear. I was actively working through it, journaling, talking to Carl, eventually having one session with my therapist, Dr. Ann Pierce, whom I see occasionally when something big comes up. Let me tell you what I was actually weighing. On one side, she's my mother. She's sick. She's dying, possibly. Whatever she did 40 years ago, she's a human being facing serious illness and the basic human desire to not face it alone. On the other side, she made a specific choice 40 years ago. She chose Gerald over her children. She had 40 years, specifically the last 6 years since Gerald died, to reach out, apologize, begin repairing what she'd broken. She chose not to, and now, only when she needed something, was she reaching out. There's a word for relationships where one person is only present when they need something. That word is transactional, and I'd spent 40 years removing transactional relationships from my life. But there was something else I was weighing, something more complicated and more personal, something that had to do not just with what Ruth had done to me, but with who I'd become in response to it. I'd built my entire identity around being the opposite of Ruth, the mother who stays, the woman who makes hard choices that prioritize others, the person who can be depended on. If I flew to Nashville, sat by her bedside, provided the care and presence she'd denied me, was that strength? Was that grace? Was that the bigger person? Or was it performing the role of good daughter for an audience that included myself, letting Ruth off the hook for 40 years of choosing wrong, teaching everyone watching, including my own children, that abandonment has no real consequences because family forgives everything in the end? Carl, who is the most practically wise person I've ever known, said something that cut through the noise. Diane, what do you actually want? Not what you think you should want. Not what makes you the better person. What do you want? I sat with that for a long time. I want her to know what she did. I want her to understand it, not to punish her, just to have it acknowledged, actually acknowledged before she dies. Because if she dies without anyone telling her, then it just disappears, like it didn't happen. Then that's what you should do. Go there, tell her, and see what happens next. So I called Linda. I'll come, but I'm not coming to pretend everything is fine. I'm coming to have a real conversation. Can you make that happen? Linda hesitated. She's sick, Diane. It might not be the right time to... Linda, it's been 40 years. There's never going to be a right time unless we make one. Is she coherent? Is she well enough to have a real conversation? Yes. She's in treatment, not hospice. She has good days. Then I'm coming on a good day. Can you arrange that? I'll try. I flew to Nashville on a Thursday. Alone. Carl offered to come, and I said no. This was something I needed to do without a buffer, without anyone managing my emotions or running interference. Linda met me at the airport. On the drive to Ruth's condo, Gerald had left her a condo. She was comfortable, not wealthy. She briefed me. She's nervous. She's asked me 3 times today what you're like now, whether you're angry. What did you tell her? That you're direct and honest, that you're not cruel, but you're not going to perform emotions you don't feel. That's accurate. She asked if you'd bring your children. I told her I didn't know. I won't. They don't know her. Introducing them to a dying grandmother they've never met is more for her comfort than theirs. I won't do that. She'll be disappointed. She'll have to live with that. Linda pulled into a parking space outside a tidy condo complex, turned off the engine, looked at me. She's scared, Diane. I know. So was I at 18. So was Patrice at 15. Being scared doesn't mean you get to skip accountability. The condo was neat and slightly impersonal, the home of someone who'd moved around a lot and hadn't fully committed to any space. Photos on the mantel, Gerald, Gerald's children, a few extended family members. No photos of me or Patrice. Ruth was in the living room when we came in. She was 78, thinner than I remembered her being in any photograph I'd seen, with the particular gray pallor of someone in chemotherapy. She was smaller than I expected. I'd carried her in my memory as large and present, the way parents loom in childhood recollection. In reality, she was a small elderly woman who looked frightened. She looked at me and her eyes filled immediately. Diane. Hello, Ruth. I noticed my own choice of words. Not Mom. Ruth. She noticed too. Her face shifted, not surprised exactly, but acknowledging. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't. She gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. Linda slipped into the kitchen with the quiet skill of someone who understands when to disappear. We looked at each other across 40 years. You look like your father, she said finally. People say that. He was a good man. He was. We both had to figure out how to live without him. I wasn't strong enough. After he died, I know. I was there. I watched it happen. I kept my voice even, not cruel, just clear. And then I managed the household for 2 years, and Gerald arrived, and you made a choice. I know what I did. Do you? Because I want to hear you say it specifically, not generally, specifically. The room was quiet. I left you, she said. I left you and Patrice, with almost nothing, when you were 18 and she was 15. Because Gerald told you to. Because I was weak and I loved him and I chose him. Yes. And in the 40 years since then, she looked at her hands. I thought about reaching out. Many times. After the wedding. When you graduated, Linda told me. When you had your children. When Gerald died. Her voice broke slightly. I was ashamed. And I didn't know how to begin. And every year that passed made it feel more impossible. So you didn't? No! And now you have cancer and you're reaching out. Yes. And you want what, Ruth? What is it you're hoping for from this visit? The question hung there. She'd clearly rehearsed parts of this conversation, and this question had broken through her script. I want to know you're okay, that both of you are okay, that what I did didn't ruin you. You want absolution. I want to know you survived. We survived. Despite everything, we survived. Patrice is 55 and teaches children who need her and has a daughter who adores her. I have a career, a husband who loves me, 2 children who would never understand what you did because I made sure they wouldn't have to. I paused. We survived. But I want to be honest with you, because you're dying, and honesty is the only thing I have to offer you that has any value. What you did damaged us. Not permanently. We healed. But it happened, and it cost us years of stability and security and trust and the basic confidence that comes from having a mother who chooses you. You cost us those things. Ruth was crying now. Not dramatically, quietly, small tears tracking down her face. I know. I'm not here to punish you. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to withhold myself from you to hurt you the way you hurt me. But I'm also not going to pretend the last 40 years didn't happen. I'm not going to perform forgiveness I haven't fully arrived at. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. I came here to have this conversation. The rest I'm figuring out as I go. Over the next 3 weeks, I made several decisions that people will have strong opinions about. I want to explain each one clearly because context matters and the surface-level facts can look very different from the inside. Decision 1. I did not move to Nashville to care for her. Ruth's cancer treatment was being managed by her oncologist with home health aides for daily care and Linda checking in regularly. Gerald's children, Frank and Deborah, were technically her stepchildren and had some sense of obligation, though they'd made clear it had limits. She'd asked through Linda if I might consider staying closer during treatment. The implication was that I might serve as primary family support. I thought about it seriously, ran the practical numbers. My real estate business, while established, required my presence and attention. Carl and I had a life in Raleigh. My own adult children were close enough to visit regularly, and I didn't want to disrupt that infrastructure. But beyond the practical considerations, I came back to the question Carl had asked. What do you actually want? I didn't want to uproot my life to care for a woman who'd upended my childhood for a man who'd never cared about us. That's not cruelty. That's an honest assessment of what I had to give. There's a particular social expectation placed on daughters, especially daughters of difficult mothers, that they'll show up in crisis regardless of history. That blood obligation supersedes everything. That being the bigger person means doing the labor regardless of what you've received. I reject that. Not because I'm heartless, because I genuinely believe that relationships require investment to have claims on each other. Ruth had invested 40 years in Gerald, in her own shame and avoidance, in not doing the work to repair what she'd broken. The relationship she was trying to cash in on when the cancer came didn't exist in any meaningful way. What I offered instead, I would visit once a month. I would be honest. I would not pretend at warmth I didn't feel or forgiveness I hadn't reached, but I would show up physically and give her the reality of who I'd become. That was the most genuine thing I could offer. Decision 2. I told Patrice and let her make her own choice. My sister is not an extension of me. She has her own grief, her own relationship history with Ruth, her own emotional accounting to do. I called Patrice after my first Nashville visit and told her everything, every word of the conversation, what Ruth had said, what I'd said, what the condo looked like, the absence of photos of us on the mantel. She cried? Patrice asked. Yes. Was it real? I think so, but I also think it was partly about her own fear, not just about us. Patrice was quiet for a while. I want to see her. Then you should. Do you think I'm being soft? No. I think you have different things you need from this than I do. Whatever you get from seeing her, you should go get it. Patrice went to Nashville the following week. She called me after, crying. Not sad crying, something more complicated. Relief, maybe. Or grief for the mother that might have been. She told me she was sorry, specifically. Named the things she'd done. Said she understood if I couldn't forgive her, but she needed me to know. Did it help? Yes. Diane, yes. It helped. Pause. She asked about you, whether you'd forgiven her. What did you say? That you were working on it. Was that wrong? No, it's accurate. Decision 3. I found out about the money. This is the part of the story that changed things for me. Not in a dramatic movie moment way, but in the specific clarifying way that information sometimes recalibrates your understanding of what actually happened. During my second visit to Nashville, I was helping Linda organize some of Ruth's papers. She'd asked us to help her get her affairs in order. In the process, I found financial records I hadn't known existed. My father's life insurance policy had paid out $75,000 when he died in 1978. I'd known about the policy. I'd known there was some insurance money. What I hadn't known was what happened to it. What I found, Ruth and Gerald had opened a joint account in 1981, 3 years after my father died, and the same year they got serious. The remaining life insurance money, approximately $52,000 at that point, was deposited into that account. Gerald's children received inheritance when he died. The estate records, which Linda helped me access, showed that Gerald had listed Ruth as primary heir, but had designated $40,000 each to Frank and Deborah from a separate account that had been funded over decades with regular transfers from the joint account. The joint account that contained my father's life insurance money. I want to be precise about what this means and what it doesn't. It doesn't mean Gerald or Ruth stole money that was legally mine. The insurance policy had paid to Ruth as beneficiary. Legally, it was hers to do with as she chose. But morally, my father had paid premiums on that policy believing it would protect his children. And that money had been used, at least partially, to fund Gerald's children's inheritance. Gerald's children who'd never been abandoned, never been left with 3 days of food and $200, never had to defer college to raise a sibling. I held that knowledge for a long time before deciding what to do with it. I didn't confront Ruth about it that visit. I went home, talked to Carl, talked to my own attorney about what recourse, if any, existed, essentially none. The statute of limitations and the legal ownership structure made any claim impractical. Then I went back to Nashville for visit 3. I found Dad's insurance records, I told Ruth. She knew immediately what I meant. The color changed in her face. Gerald needed the stability. We were starting our life together and... Ruth, don't explain Gerald to me. Just tell me, did you know that money was meant for our security? For Patrice and me? Yes. And you chose to use it for your new life anyway. I know how that sounds. I need you to understand what I lived through because of financial instability during those years. I need you to know specifically that I deferred college for a year to support Patrice because I had no money, and you had $52,000 of my father's insurance money, and you chose to build a life with Gerald instead of protecting us? Yes. Her voice was barely audible. I know. I've known for 40 years. Good. I said. "I needed you to know that I know too." What happened next surprised me. She picked up a folder from the table beside her. She'd had it ready, I realized, had known this conversation was coming, or something like it. "I changed my will last month," she said, "after your first visit. Whatever is left, the condo, my savings, I've split it equally between you and Patrice. Gerald's children received what they were supposed to receive when he died. You and your sister get everything that's mine. It won't be much, but it's yours." I looked at the folder but didn't open it. "That's not why I came here." "I know, but it's the only restitution I can make. It's not enough. Nothing is enough. But it's what I have." Month 3 of my Nashville visits, something shifted. Ruth's treatment was not going well. The chemotherapy had bought time, but not reversal. Her oncologist had begun using words like managing progression rather than recovery. The prognosis was no longer uncertain. It was bad. Possibly 12 to 18 months. She was more fragile now, physically diminished in ways the first visit hadn't shown me, and the fragility made something in me respond. Not maternal exactly, but human. The basic recognition that here was a person in pain, and I was capable of easing some of it. I bought her a proper nightstand light so she could read without straining. I arranged her medications in a system she could follow easily. I brought food from a restaurant she'd mentioned once in passing as having been her favorite during a happy period of her early life. These weren't performances. They were just the things you do when you're present with someone who needs them. But Gerald's children, Frank and Deborah, had noticed my visits, and they had opinions. Frank called me directly. He'd gotten my number from Linda. I didn't know him, had never met him, had no relationship with him whatsoever. "I understand you've been visiting Ruth," he said. He was 65, had an accent that placed him somewhere in rural Tennessee, and had the tone of a man who considered himself in charge of situations regardless of whether that was true. "I have. I want to be honest with you. Deborah and I have been checking on Ruth since Gerald passed. We have a relationship with her. We're concerned that people coming in at this stage might be looking to take advantage of her." I let the silence sit for a moment. "I'm her daughter, Frank." "I understand that, but you weren't in the picture for a long time." "Neither was she. That's a mutual situation she created when I was 18, not one I engineered." I kept my voice level. "I'm not here for her money. I'm here because she's dying, and she asked me to come, and I made a decision about who I want to be." "She's changed her will." "I know. I didn't ask her to. Her original will split everything between Deborah and me. We'd been told that was settled." "Then I guess it changed. That's her right." "We've cared for her." "For 6 years since your father died. I understand, and you should be compensated for that in some way. That's between you and her attorney." I paused. "But, Frank, I'm going to say this once clearly. I didn't come to Nashville to fight over an estate. I came because my mother is dying, and she's my mother, and the kind of person I've spent 40 years trying to be shows up, so that's what I'm doing. Are we clear?" There was a pause. "Fair enough." He hung up. Deborah never called me directly, but the interaction crystallized something I'd been circling for months. The choice I was making to show up for Ruth despite 40 years of absence wasn't about her. It was about me, about who I was and who I wanted to remain. I'd spent 40 years as the opposite of Ruth, stable, present, choosing my children over convenience or comfort or new relationships that might want them gone. I'd built an identity in deliberate contrast to what she'd done. And now, facing her dying, I had a choice about whether to extend that same commitment to showing up, imperfectly, honestly, without pretending, but physically present, to the woman who hadn't shown it to me. I chose to show up, but on my terms. No performance of closeness I didn't feel. No pretending 40 years hadn't happened. No absorbing her guilt to make her comfortable. No letting Frank and Deborah rewrite the story to make me the interloper. Just honest, present, complicated daughter showing up for honest, scared, complicated mother. Some people in my life didn't understand this. Patrice, who'd processed things differently and arrived at something closer to genuine reconciliation, thought I was holding back too much. "You're still so guarded with her." "Yes." It's her last months, Diane. Maybe let it go. I'm not holding it against her. I'm just not pretending it didn't happen. Is there a difference? Yes. One is punishment. The other is honesty. My son Marcus, when I explained the situation, said something that's stayed with me. Mom, whatever you decide, just make sure it's what you actually want. Not what you think you should want. Not what makes you look like the bigger person. Just what you actually want. He sounded exactly like Carl. I'd raised him well. I'm writing this from my home office in Raleigh on a Tuesday evening in early autumn. Outside, the leaves are just beginning to turn, the particular gold orange of October that I've always loved, that feels like the world taking a breath before winter. Ruth died 8 weeks ago. Not dramatically, quietly, in the early morning, with a home health aide present and Linda sleeping in the guest room. Patrice had been there the week before and had said what she needed to say. I'd been there 10 days prior on my last monthly visit. That last visit was the best conversation we'd ever had. Not the most healing necessarily. Some of those had come in earlier months when the harder truths were being spoken. But the best, in the sense of two people actually seeing each other without the noise of expectation or performance. She told me about my father, stories I hadn't known, how they'd met, what he'd been like as a young man, what their early years had looked like before grief and loss, and Gerald rewrote everything. He would have been so proud of you, she said. I know. I should have said that to you decades ago. Yes, but you're saying it now. Is that worth anything? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Yes, I said honestly. Not everything, not 40 years. But yes, it's worth something. She smiled, the small, fragile smile of someone who's been given something they didn't expect. We sat together for 2 more hours. Didn't fill all the silence. Just existed in the same room, which had felt impossible for 40 years and was now, somehow, possible. When I left that evening, I hugged her. Properly. Not the careful side hug of obligation, but the real kind. She held on longer than I expected. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for being honest instead of kind. I tried to be both. You mostly were. The estate, when settled, left Patrice and me approximately $180,000 each. The condo after sale and her savings split as she'd promised. Frank and Deborah contested the will change. Their attorney sent letters. My attorney responded. They backed down when it became clear Ruth had been fully competent when she amended the will and had done so with proper legal counsel. I don't need the money. I did well enough in real estate that $180,000, while not insignificant, doesn't change my life. But I accepted it because my father's work went into that money originally, because my mother had intended it as restitution, and because accepting it was honest. I gave $50,000 to Patrice's school, specifically to fund a reading program for kids who are struggling. Patrice cried when I told her. Why that? Because we both needed more support at certain ages. Because someone should make sure other kids get it. I kept the rest, put it toward my grandchildren's education funds. Marcus has a daughter now, 3 years old, who has no idea what her great-grandmother did and will never need to. She'll just know there's money for her future because someone thought about her before she was born. The way my father thought about me. What did 40 years of estrangement and 7 months of difficult reconciliation actually teach me? Reconciliation doesn't require erasure. I never pretended the 40 years didn't happen. I never forgave in the sense of, it's all fine now. I forgave in the sense of not carrying it as active poison, not letting it be the biggest thing in the room when I was with her. Showing up isn't the same as approving. I visited Ruth monthly because I decided that's who I am, someone who shows up. Not because she'd earned it, not because the slate was clean, but because I wasn't willing to let her choices 40 years ago dictate who I became. Children of absent parents are not obligated to perform devotion. The expectation that daughters will nurse dying mothers regardless of history is a social script, not a moral requirement. I chose to show up, but I made that choice freely, not from guilt or obligation. Deathbed reconciliations are real, but incomplete. We had real conversations, real moments, real honesty. But we couldn't undo 40 years in 7 months. What we got was partial, complicated, and real. That has to be enough. The person I built myself into, in opposition to what she did, is the greatest outcome of her absence. I didn't build my life to prove anything to her. I built it to survive, to thrive, to be the mother she hadn't been. And I succeeded. That success belongs to me, not to her story. I'm 58 years old. I have a husband who knows every complicated part of me. I have 2 adult children who call because they want to, not because they feel they have to. I have a granddaughter who looks at me with the particular trust of someone who's never had any reason to doubt I'd be there. I have a sister who survived alongside me and built her own remarkable life. And I have the complicated, incomplete, real thing that 7 months of honest conversation made possible with a woman who'd left me when I was 18 and didn't come back until she was dying. It wasn't the reunion people imagine in movies. No dramatic forgiveness scene, no washing away of history, no transformation of a difficult mother into the one I'd needed her to be. Just 2 women in a tidy condo in Nashville being honest with each other for the first time and the last time, about what had happened and what it had cost and what, if anything, could be recovered from the wreckage. Not everything, but something. And something, after 40 years of nothing, was enough. If you've navigated reconciliation with a parent who failed you or chosen not to, I'd hear your story. This is one of the most complicated things humans do. Nobody should do it alone. Raleigh, North Carolina, October, after the leaves turned. Writing this because it needed to be said,